Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I would like to welcome you warmly to the launch of a special report on drought 2021 on this World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought. My name is Loretta Heber-Girardet, and I am the Chief of the Risk Knowledge Monitoring and Capacity Building Branch of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Today's session will be split into two parts. In the first high-level part, we will hear remarks from Ms. Mami Mitsutori, the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and head of the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We will also hear from Mr. Ibrahim Tiao, the UN Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. We will also have as our keynote speaker, Dr. Jane Lubchenco, the Deputy Director for Climate and Environment, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the Executive Office of the President of the United States of America. And a video message from Stephen Quest, who is the Director General of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. In the second part of today's session, there will be an introduction to key findings, case studies, and recommendations of the report from Dr. Roger Pulwarty, who is the Senior Scientist for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. I would now like to hand the floor to Ms. Mami Mitsutori, UN Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and head of UNDRR.
Thank you very much, Lori, and thank you very much to everyone joining us today from around the world for the launch of the GAR Special Report on Drought 2021 on this important day, the World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought. On behalf of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to everyone who has worked with us to bring this report to light. My thanks go to our GAR Advisory Board, who steered the work through concept to completion, to the more than 80 authors who contributed their time and expertise. Just like the whole of society approach for disaster risk reduction in the Sendai framework, this process has been a truly collaborative effort. In particular, my thanks go to our three lead authors, Dr. Roger Pulwarty from the Physical Sciences Laboratory at the NOAA Office of Oceans and Atmospheric Research, Dr. Jürgen Vogt from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, and last but not least, Dr. Wadid Arian, Professor of Soil Science at Cairo University. Their findings will be presented here today by Dr. Pulwarty, and we are grateful for their leadership and commitment to this project. Now, of all the hazards we face, you may be wondering, why did you pick drought? The Global Assessment Report published in 2019 highlighted the increasingly systemic nature of risks surrounding our contemporary societies. In a global connected world, risks and their impact can no longer be treated or managed in isolation. We are living through this at real time with the cascading and devastating effects of COVID-19. Drought is another all too vivid example of this. Estimates show that droughts have affected at least 1.5 billion people since the turn of the century and led to economic losses of more than US dollars 124 billion to across the world. With indirect costs nearly impossible to measure, the true impact is many times higher. With climate change, we are expecting extreme weather events to hit harder and more frequently in coming years. And in a 1.5-degree warmer world, there is no doubt that drought will become a more regular event, unfortunately. Drought is not something that hits us suddenly, nor something that we can quarantine our way out of. Drought does not have vaccines against it. Drought manifests over months, years, sometimes decades, and the results are felt just as long. Drought exhibits and exacerbates the social and economic inequalities that are deep-rooted within our systems and hits the most vulnerable the hardest. But the good news is that, as we will hear in the findings of the GAR special report today, we know what needs to be done. It will take innovative partnerships, integrated mechanisms, and adaptive governance to overcome the threat that drought poses. This report could not be timelier. Later this year, the United Nations will convene the Food Systems Summit and the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties. And in early next year, the 15th session of the COP to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. Many of the scientists who have contributed to this report will transmit their knowledge during their vital multinational processes. The GAR special report on drought is a call to action. We must act now if we are to meet the goals of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction so that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development will be achieved and generations to come will live and prosper in a safer, more resilient, risk-proofed future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mami Mitsutori. And it's now my pleasure to invite Mr. Ibrahim Tiao, the United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, for his opening remarks. Mr. Tiao, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mami, for this report. Thank you for putting together this very important special report on drought. My take from the report is that we must act now to prevent future droughts from destroying development gains. As we speak, 1 million people are facing starvation because of drought. At least 24 countries are hit by droughts in 2021 only. From 1998 to 2017, droughts have affected 1.5 billion people and led to economic losses of $124 billion across the globe. Within the next 80 years, 129 countries will experience an increase in drought exposure. Droughts are growing due to climate change and other human-driven factors. When I say at least 1.5 billion people are already faced with water stress, you may take it as statistics. But beyond these numbers, we have human beings that are suffering. I personally witnessed the effects of drought. So for me, this is not a theory. I'm not reading statistics. I did not watch it on television. Droughts destroy life. They demolish our social fabric. You see with your very eyes, you watch and see your assets vanishing live. This affects you for the rest of your life. It has on you the effects of a permanent marker. It's indelible. This is why I'm happy to say that parties to the UNCCD take droughts very seriously. At the last conference of the parties, they established an intergovernmental working group on drought. Discussions are ongoing, helping prepare negotiations for the next conference of the parties due for 2022. It is by coincidence that in most countries, or is it really by coincidence, that in most countries, years of drought are listed as years of economic downturn? Most countries have the economies essentially dependent on the primary sector, which means that they depend on a thin layer of soil and a few millimeters of rain. When the rain does not come on time and in good quantity, the water stress induces a major disruption. When at the same time the soil is degraded, the crisis can turn into a catastrophe. This is why the threats caused by droughts should unite us. We need to join forces to mitigate the effects on people, on nature, on the economy. We don't have to wait until the disruption turns into a disaster before we respond. Emergency measures are not, or they are really costly to deploy. They are less efficient, more often than not, they arrive a little bit late despite heroic efforts by rescue teams. Dear friends, no country is immune to drought, rich or poor. Yes, the impacts of drought hit the poorest countries hardest, but high-income countries are also feeling the impact. We must deal with drought using every tool we can. So what are these tools? As the theme of today's Desertification and Drought Day is restoration, land, recovery. Let us start there. Trillions of dollars are put into the pandemic recovery, rightly so. Meanwhile, commitments covering almost 1 billion hectares are in place as we head on the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. This presents us with a chance to build back better with healthy land. Land restoration is simple, inexpensive, and accessible to all. It removes carbon from the atmosphere, slowing the climate change that drives drought. It helps vulnerable communities adapt to droughts by, for example, increasing water storage. It increases agricultural production. All of this would reduce the estimated 700 million people at risk of being displaced by drought and land degradation by 2030. Restoration is not enough, however. We need to protect and manage the land through sustainable consumption and production. On the agriculture side, this means sustainable and efficient management techniques that grow more food with less land and water. On the consumption side, this means changing our relationships with food and clothing. We must also understand that droughts is a complex phenomenon with a range of causes and impacts. These should not be considered in isolation. We need coordination, communication, and cooperation. With proactive national drought policies and a joined up approach to managing natural resources, we can mitigate the effects of droughts. Some 66 countries are participating in the UNCCD Global Drought Initiative. This initiative supports parties to shift from a reactive approach to drought to a proactive and risk-based approach. We are attacking the problem from many angles, from addressing gender concerns to strengthening land tenure. Friends, we must all act now to ensure that drought do not set humanity back on its great endeavor to build a sustainable future. I urge you all to implement the findings of this report. Existing tools and resources may not be enough, but they can get us far if we make a better use of the existing tools. Early warning, preparedness, response. We will be more efficient, much more efficient, if we develop and implement integrated plans. Working together, we can ensure that the people of drought-hit regions have the chance of a better life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tiao. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jane Luchenko, who is the Deputy Director for Climate and Environment, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, the Executive Office of the President of the United States of America, who will be delivering the keynote remarks. Dr. Luchenko has had a long-standing academic career, has served several US administrations, and has received numerous awards recognizing her leadership and service to science and society. And we are extremely honored to have Dr. Luchenko with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. Let me begin by offering my warm thanks and congratulations on this report to Ms. Mami Mitsutori, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, Mr. Ibrahim Chiao, Director General of the UN Convention for Combating Desertification and Drought, and the Joint Research Center at the European Commission. I would also like to thank all of those who contributed to this landmark report, but in particular the convening lead authors, Wadid Arian from Cairo University in the League of Arab States, Roger Pulwarty from NOAA, and Jorgen Voth from the EC Joint Research Center, and Mark Gordon, the coordinating editor, who shepherded the process on behalf of the UNDRR. As you are all well aware, drought is among the most damaging and least understood of all natural hazards. Although recent drought-related disasters from Somalia to Cape Town and ongoing Western US and Northern Mexico have contributed a sense of urgency, droughts have not received commensurate attention within the hazards research and practitioners communities compared to events such as hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes, which have direct and immediately visible impacts. Drought spans timescales from a few months and seasons to decades, and spatial scales from a few square kilometers to entire regions, with billions of dollars, ecosystem impacts, and as we just heard, thousands of lives and livelihoods affected or lost. Yet, drought remains, as noted by the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, a hidden hazard because of the complexities of the drivers and difficulties in attribution of direct impacts. Despite significant progress, there are still important limitations on our understanding and ability to predict various aspects of drought, including onset, duration, severity, recovery, and recurrence. Most countries, regions, and communities currently manage drought risk through a reactive, crisis-driven approach. As described in this special report that we launched today, faster rates of environmental change, including compounding effects of heat stress and evaporative demand, and the increasingly complex pathways that affect impacts, may drive surprises and rapid transitions across landscapes and watersheds. This special report is thus much needed and timely contribution to understanding the socio-ecological conditioning factors of drought. In the present globally networked setting, it's critical to advance proactive, risk-based approaches that link early warnings with action, including resilience efforts that reduce the emergence of new risks. Bringing together practitioners with scientists to co-develop actionable information and ensure its usefulness to communities is a critically important part of this approach. This report illustrates the need not only to understand and design information systems for change, but also to design robust science-based systems and decision pathways that help us learn and navigate through present and projected changes. The case studies and chapters in the report can help support the training of professionals and actions that enable communities to thrive on this changing planet. In recognition of the need to link risk and resilience, the US has created the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS, and its complement, the multi-agency National Drought Resilience Partnership. And we have been engaged internationally through efforts such as the International Drought Management Program and the USAID Famine Early Warning System Network. The Biden-Harris administration is committed to ensuring that benefits reach underserved communities, including those disproportionately impacted by climate variability and change, and that broad engagement occurs around land and water conservation and resilience efforts. But improving knowledge is not enough. New collaborations and reshaped institutions are needed for facilitating broader choices and changes in human behavior to increase local awareness and understanding of shared global concerns, and to correct collective action failures that drive global scale problems and local imbalances. The report advances these efforts in many ways. It provides a modernized view of drought. It shares lessons learned from lived experiences of managing drought risks and impacts. And it provides scientifically informed governance mechanisms to create a more adaptive and drought resilient global community. Such an integrated local to national to global system would indeed be transformative. This report thus provides robust approaches to managing these challenges. This is an unprecedented opportunity. We have huge challenges ahead of us. The report gives us the guidance and helps set our international and national aspirations for a sustainable future on just such a path. So I thank the authors and the sponsors of this report. Now it is time to put this important report into action. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Luchenko, for your very inspiring keynote remarks. Very appreciated. I would now like to announce that we will be hearing a video message by Stephen Quest, Director General of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, which has contributed considerably to this report.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to thank the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction for the invitation to attend the launch of this very timely and outstanding special report on drought. My name is Stephen Quest, and I'm the Director General of the Joint Research Centre, the European Commission Science and Knowledge Service. Some of our scientists have contributed to the report, and one of them, Jürgen Vogt, is one of the coordinating lead authors. More than ever before, scientists have a key role to play with respect to decision makers. Scientific data, observations and models were essential in the processes that led to the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, or the Sendai Framework. They underpin important European legislation on the Green Deal and the adaptation to climate change as well. Drought is one of the most worrying hazards for future generations. It causes a systemic risk, and building resilience to climate change in general, and to droughts in particular, requires solid scientific evidence and research. The JRC has long-term expertise in this field, ranging from the scientific analysis of the physical processes behind the drought and the socio-economic factors driving the vulnerability, as well as the development of drought monitoring and early warning systems for Europe and for the globe. As part of the Copernicus Emergency Management Service, these systems serve EU and global disaster risk management, and they help to raise awareness among the public. JRC's methodologies for vulnerability assessment are included in the UNCCD Drought Toolbox, and through our PESETA projects, JRC scientists have analysed a wide range of current and future disaster risks and their economic impacts. Just to mention one, we estimate that with 3 degrees centigrade warming, direct drought losses in the European Union will increase by 5 times to nearly 45 billion euros a year in 2100. And droughts will also hit non-traditional areas. The Atlantic region, including the Netherlands, Belgium and France, will actually see the largest relative increase in drought losses. Together with other JRC findings, we will support the development of better policies. Key issues in this context are the building of knowledge networks and fostering collaboration across national boundaries and scales. The development of the European Drought Observatory into a Drought Observatory for Resilience and Adaptation, which is coordinated by the JRC, is an important example of these activities. On the global level, the JRC's Global Drought Observatory transfers knowledge by supporting the development of regional early warning systems in other parts of the world. Examples are the setup of a system for South and Central America through the Euroclima program and the ongoing CleamSA program, which supports the development of a drought regional early warning system for Eastern Africa. Now, let me highlight what I consider the two main conclusions from the report. First, the need for better and more systematically recorded impact data, and the need for analysis of related vulnerabilities. Both are, in my view, crucial to study the risk and the cascading effects across national economies and global networks of trade. And second, the need for better collaboration across sectors, scales, and nations, and the development of adequate regional and global mechanisms to foster coordinated approach towards more resilient societies. This includes the development of early warning systems, embracing local knowledge and communities, and the development of drought management plans, the sharing of scientific knowledge and practical experiences, and the development of prospective risk governance mechanisms. I believe that today's event and this report can offer the appropriate platform for a global action for better resilience to droughts. Of course, the JRC stands ready to help with the implementation of these conclusions in order to reduce current and avoid future risks stemming from droughts and a changing climate. Thank you.
It is now time for the second part of today's session, and I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Roger Pulwarty, the senior scientist in the NOAA Physical Sciences Laboratory in Boulder, Colorado, who is one of the three lead authors of the GAR Special Report on Drought. Dr. Pulwarty's research of over 120 publications focuses on climate science, adaptation, and science policy. He is chair of the Executive Council of the U.S. National Integrated Drought Information System and co-chair of the Climate Services Information System Implementation Team of the World Meteorological Organization. Dr. Pulwarty, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who's tuned in today and for the excellent introductions and the depth. So thank you to the UNDR, the UNCCD, the EC Joint Research Center, and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I'm particularly proud and honored to have Dr. Lubchenko at this meeting. She is actually one of the people who's led much of the way in thinking about systemic risks over her career, and not just thinking about it, but leading actions. The last group I'd like to thank, of course, are the many contributors on behalf of the CLAs, Jürgen Vogt and Wadid Arian, to the institutions that have also supported these contributors for taking part. So as we go into the discussion of the contents of the report, I'm going to go off a video just to make sure we have some bandwidth covered and then follow on. Great, thanks. So next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so as we think through these cases, we have a lot of lessons. Go back, please. Yeah. We have a lot of lessons from past events. The IPCC Special Report on Extremes, the GAR report of 2011, which has had the very first chapter on drought and sort of exposed quite a great deal, thanks to Wadid Arian and others, the issues surrounding potential conflict and drought risks, or just how that might be exacerbated. And then a whole series of activities, such as the 10-step plans for the International Drought Management Program and others, drought in the Anthropocene by the UN, by UNESCO and others. And this report synthesizes many of those lessons and then draws very carefully from the lessons we want to draw. Now we like to draw lessons. We're very interested in actually learning lessons as well in the way we apply or work. So the contents of the report are modernizing current understanding of drought. In other words, as you heard from the speakers before me, there are immediate impacts to agriculture, but as we will see in a few minutes, a lot of these actually filtered through ecosystems, communities, economies, and water, energy, health, agriculture, biodiversity, and coasts. We then get into what have we been experiencing and who has been acting and how they've been affected and what is that teaching us. Then from risk to resilience, what does that mean? It means we need the near term and we need the long term in thinking through how we respond through a changing environment. And then we'll draw some of the conclusions from the directions that we're advocating. So next slide, please. So in this particular picture, we get a sense of how we traditionally think about drought. Drought happens, you have a shortage of precipitation, the people are exposed, we have vulnerable groups, and we need better data on assessing vulnerabilities, as you heard from the JRC. You have crop damage, and then there are all the other things that drive the context of the direct and indirect impacts of drought. And for us to think about that, when a hurricane happens, you have an insured loss, it hits a building, you know what's happening, or communities are displaced, you have a sense of immediately, but the timescales of drought introduces complexity. In fact, there's a lot of work described in this report on what we call short-term or flash droughts. In other words, when you have a drought, a shortage of precipitation or a shortage of water in a key growing period or in a key demand period, then you have a serious impact. It doesn't have to be decades long. But then we are also experiencing decades-long impacts. And as we can see, there are potential interconnections much beyond just the local level that actually drives many of the imbalances of the local level: the water supply, land subsidence, energy, livestock, farming. And one of the key things about drought is many societies across the board have developed adaptation strategies for the onset of drought, but then many of those buffers are then used up when a drought intensifies, and that puts us into a situation of crisis. Next slide, please. So this figure in chapter 1 from our report gives us a sense of, as we go into the future for different global warming levels, the changes in the meteorological, that is the precipitation-based aspects of drought frequency, together with changes in humidity, potentially winds and surface temperature, tells us, of course, with warming conditions, we'll see not necessarily more frequent droughts per se, but intensified droughts when they do occur, making it more difficult to get out of drought events when we do enter into them. On the right side, it says number of unrecorded drought. What that means is how we move into the future from not just the unfamiliar, but to the unprecedented. For many of these very same regions, what the figure really is showing is where we used to get let's say a category 1 or category 2 drought, you're seeing categories 3 and 4, and where those might be occurring into the future for different levels of warming. So this is the way we characterize now the changing components of the physical drivers of drought. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm not, of course, asking everyone to read every little piece of fine print on this piece, of course, but to give you a sense of what you've heard from the speakers before me here and the way we're characterizing this is the complex nature of not just drought, but the complexity of responding to a multifaceted, multidimensional, multi-timescale set type of event or sequences of events. Because as Mami Mitsutori constantly reminds us, the big events do matter, but so do sequences of smaller events that can create impacts. So as we link hazard and system vulnerabilities, as we move through preparedness, risk reduction, risk transfer, insurance schemes, and adaptation, many of which are outlined in this report, we're actually asking, what do we do about the complexity of the system and the way it impacts local and global networks? Now, it's important to note that we don't throw our hands up at complexity. What we do, as we know for a long time in the adaptive management literature, certainly in the oceans and fisheries arena, that we do not manage large systems, we manage the human interactions with those systems. And so what this figure tries to tell us is where are the entry points for action that prevents systemic failure. Just next, please. But what we're seeing is that due to the widespread and cascading impacts of drought, often not explicitly attributed to drought, the damage and costs for droughts are seriously underestimated. In some areas of the world, we estimate that it could be anywhere from 4 to 6 times the impact of the immediate event. So droughts are seriously underestimated, and the economic assessments of drought are very, very difficult across the board to be able to assess. So what we did as well was try to get at the lived experience. What is being learned? What is being learned from cases around the world? And if you'd click, please. As we look at these watersheds, these localities, these basins, we ask the cases to draw not just, did you have a drought and what's the experience of drought, but do drought policies and legislation exist here in each of these? Have they been useful? What steps have been taken to mitigate drought? How have uncertainties been dealt with? How are the complex pathways of drought, such as through the water, energy, food nexus, been addressed? How are the costs of impacts being assessed? And then what has been the role of local adaptations, technology, and information systems in helping us to manage drought risks? And how have equity and ethical concerns of justice been met? A key part of the cases that you will read within this report on the lived experience has everything to do with the fact that people have been and lived in areas for millennia. Yet some of those practices are being overwhelmed by the changing environment. So we ask as well, within each of these cases, what are the barriers to the adoption of proactive, prospective drought risk management, and to more broadly, to implementing resilience-based alternatives? That's a key part of what the cases try to describe, as we ask constantly through the report, what is this a case of? And so in that setting, we say we look at transboundary watersheds, as was just described by the JRC. We're seeing those impacts in the Danube, in the Rhine, in the Paraná-Paraguay system in South America, in the Nile, in between the US, Mexico, the US and Canada, and then locally in terms of what people are doing for their day-to-day lives. The gaps are assessed for data and information, transboundary watersheds, as I mentioned, ecosystems, the value of landscape restorations, but then also a sense of where are we going from here. Next slide, please. To keep some of this in mind, and this is a figure jointly produced with IASA, it's in this report, the multi-scale nature of the drivers and institutions affecting food systems are complex. And as you could see, if you put just the food system in the middle, which doesn't, makes it a good target, all of the other drivers around are contextual. They're political, ecological, social, and driven at many different scales. So systemic drought risk requires broadening the nature of our actor networks. And we know there are gender imbalances in productivity, there are migration issues happening, deliberate efforts at learning, and we'll speak as in fact, Dr. Levchenko quite eloquently spelled out what it takes to create systems of learning, and the just transitions in this globally interconnected food and trade system, water system, cyber system, and the rapidly changing world. If we look on the right side, there are the Sustainable Development Goals. And we make the argument in this report that there are impetus and incentives for strengthening the alignment and coherence across Paris, Sendai, the Aichi biodiversity targets, and the Sustainable Development Goals, and drought and the cascading nature of such a hazard that people experience right now can help provide a red thread in terms of the thinking through all of these systems that lead us to helping us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. So what we're about to see are 2 specific cases by colleagues of ours on advancing drought risk management in the Caribbean from Adrian Trotman, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, who's been a leader in all of these activities, from Gerald Cairo from the Global Water Partnership on Drought Resilience and Sustainability in East Africa, the IGAD or Intergovernmental Authority Development case. I want to keep something in mind as we hear these 2. These are the kinds of individuals, as Dr. Levchenko and others pointed out, that we need. The people that can bridge the impediments to the flow of information and from finding those nodes and partnerships that help us reduce the likelihood of systemic risk and collapse, but also take advantage of the opportunities. So these are 2 very unique individuals. And so I'd like to move then to the case studies. And so Adrian, if you lead on, Macduff. Yes.
Thank you for the introduction, Roger, and thanks for the organizers for this opportunity to bring to you the Caribbean context regarding drought. Ladies and gentlemen, with several Caribbean small island development states already amongst the most water scarce countries globally, severe rainfall deficits, particularly associated with extended dry seasons, can limit available and accessible water, often compromising its quality. Compounding this are higher than normal temperatures that enhance drying through increased evaporative losses. Further, climate projections suggest decreasing rainfall totals and increasing temperatures as the region traverses the 21st century. These lead to a future with more severe droughts and possibly more frequent events. The Caribbean is witness to many negative cascading and compounded multi-sector effects of drought, which are expected to be exacerbated under this changing climate. Agriculture, as in many other parts of the globe, is chiefly affected. However, many other socioeconomic sectors in the Caribbean experience significant impacts that threaten lives and livelihoods. Whether it is boating and other water sports that are restricted due to low river flows, cascading into impacts on tourism, or education where schools are forced to close due to the stench from those nearby low-flowing rivers where pollutants become more concentrated, triggering fish kills. Or maybe schools are closed because there's no access to potable water. Or, as in the case of health concerns due to restricted access to water for sanitizing during COVID-19. The impacts go far beyond just simply having less access to water at household taps. Initially driven by concerns over agricultural drought, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology established the Caribbean Drought and Precipitation Monitoring Network in 2009 to monitor and forecast drought events. The activity of this network was quickly called into action as one of the most severe droughts in Caribbean history was on the horizon. This 2009-2010 event challenged the region to give greater consideration to drought as a disaster that has to be managed more strategically, particularly in light of climate change projections. Encouragingly, however, the most recent Caribbean-wide event in 2014 to 2016, some 5 or so years later, illustrated that despite the severity and extensive nature of the drought, the region was better prepared, having had early warning information and built capacity since 2009, as well as having put into place a high confidence drought outlook alerting system in 2014. Partnering with regional and national sector communities was key to the development, awareness, and use of the drought products. Collaborating under the umbrella of the Consortium of Regional Sectoral Early Warning Information Systems across climate timescales, a mouthful, yes, we call it just USACs. This was established amongst its partners in 2017, CIMH and regional agencies from 6 priority sectors: agriculture and food security, health, energy, water, disaster risk reduction, and of course, tourism, vowed to work together to combat potentially disastrous climate-related extremes like drought. This multi-stakeholder partnership has been bearing fruit with joint research and development programs and co-developed sector-targeted climate information products. Similar partnerships being established at the national level will foster collaboration that will continue to build resilience at the national and community levels. The regional and national partnerships established to seek to continue building resilience through robust integrated drought planning at the national and community levels and developing targeted plans for vulnerable sectors like agriculture. To align with this, the region is entering a new phase of impacts-based research to support drought planning. The Caribbean, ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to a future where the impacts of drought are nullified as we unite to build resilience. I thank you.
And now we'll have Gerald Cairo from on the IGAD case in East Africa. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Okay, thank you so much, Roger. And thank you for that excellent introduction. Once again, my name is Gerald Cairo, and working with the Global Water Partnership, Eastern Africa. I wish to share with you the IGAD case study. IGAD is Intergovernmental Authority on Development. And just in terms of geographical location, the IGAD region is located in the Horn of Africa. This region, I must mention that it's about 70% of the region's land area is within the arid and semi-arid lands. That map is basically showing you the region, the IGAD region and its location. The key challenge in this region, one of the key challenges in this region is high exposure to drought, and which is therefore causing an increasing vulnerability of the population. Drought is affecting the livelihoods of mainly the poor people and those that are disadvantaged. These are mainly the smallholder farmers and the pastoralists. And you know that most of these communities depend on agriculture. Agriculture in the region is rain-fed. There's not much irrigation in this region because of inadequate capacity to acquire irrigation equipment. Therefore, the dominant livelihood in this area is agriculture, and anything which tampers with agriculture affects the livelihoods of the people and therefore the economy of the countries in the region. Most importantly, the women and the girls are hit hardest by the burden of water scarcity. You know that the women care so much for the family, providing food, but also the girls do that important role of collecting or fetching water from distant water sources. And in many cases, the girls are harassed in the process. Therefore, achieving sustainable development pathway is challenging due to some of the drought impacts. And now, as you are aware, with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is on the rampage in the region and elsewhere, the situation is not any better. Now, this case study, therefore, is calling upon the need to increase equality in access in drought risk management. And focus needs to be put to empower women in terms of capacity building, in appropriate drought management skills, but also developing equitable credit schemes that can support the population in terms of acquiring some of the equipment that they can use to enable them adapt to drought impacts. And also the need for equal access to information. And the information I'm talking about here is drought early warning information. With this, the population, the vulnerable population in the region, their livelihoods will be uplifted, and therefore they will become more resilient to the impacts of drought. Yeah, that's the case study I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Gerald. And as we move to the next slide and we begin to take lessons from what we've heard throughout the world, the key here is the drought demands innovation, policy, science, and practice. Next slide. Cases is the reducing the emergent risks and the stocks of existing risks do save us money over time, but we've known that. $1 upfront saves us into the future. So what's really stopping us? Next slide, please. Next. So the transitions to improve drought risk assessment and management that are in this report and codified in the chapters are enabled and accelerated by effectively enhancing and sustaining the capabilities and communications and individuals by engaging women, the financial alignment, and the coevolution of science, policy, and practice. As we look at this last slide, we look and listen to Mr. Chair, drought is human. The most critical thing here is the sense of human dignity you see in both of these eyes in terms of the choices and the trajectories and the quality of lives into the future. To get there, an engagement both vertically and horizontally, global to local and back up, and across sectors and networks is necessary to support the establishment of the global mechanism for drought management and innovative financing across the Paris, Sendai, Aichi SDGs. And then within countries, the drought resilience partnerships that actually engage and broaden the actor network. A key thing here is the notion of trust, not just rational trust about the credibility of information or even procedural about how we engage people, but affinitive trust. Do others and do we have each other's interests at heart? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Prawarti, for sharing the main findings of the report, and also to the presenters on the case studies, Adrian Trotman and Gerald Carew. On behalf of UNDRR, I would like to thank all of today's speakers for their insights. We really look forward to working with you to take forward the issues discussed here today and also to apply the recommendations in the report. I would also like to note that participants that are interested in learning more about the report are invited to join a series of regional technical webinars that are being organized by UNDRR over the next few months, and we will be sharing details on our website and on social channels shortly. Finally, I would like to encourage participants to join the World Day for Combating Desertification and Drought, now live on the UNCCD website or on UN TV, where the president of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado Quesada, will be speaking to this issue in just a few minutes' time. For me, I would now like to thank everyone, all of our participants, and say goodbye. The session is now closed. Goodbye.